I'm Kelly, 29 female. I live in a quiet city fringe apartment that I designed myself, a small testament to my career as an architect. Life was structured, calm, and measured, just like the blueprints I create. But all of that was about to be demolished by the one person I should have been able to trust the most, my own sister. This is the story of how her loyalty to a manipulative man nearly destroyed me, and how my detective father and I built the perfect trap to catch them in their web of lies. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For most of my life, my sister Rachel was my other half. Just a year older, she was the vibrant, spontaneous one to my quiet, methodical nature. While I found comfort in the predictable physics of building design, she thrived in the chaotic energy of event planning. We were different, but we were close. Our parents, especially our father, Robert, always said we were two sides of the same coin. He was a police detective for 35 years before retiring, a man who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. He raised us with a fierce sense of justice and an even fiercer sense of family loyalty. That loyalty was put to the test when Rachel met Evan. On the surface, he was everything you'd want for your sister's partner. He was a personal trainer, charismatic and sculpted, with a smile that could disarm a battalion. He doted on Rachel, showering her with public displays of affection and grand romantic gestures that made her feel like the star of her own movie. Our mother adored him, and even my stoic father was initially impressed by his confident demeanor. I was the only one who felt a flicker of unease, a tiny, dissonant note in their perfect symphony. It wasn't one big thing, but a series of small, almost imperceptible moments. It was the way his eyes would scan a room when he thought no one was looking, not with curiosity, but with a kind of predatory assessment. It was the way he'd subtly steer conversations toward the topic of money, cloaking his inquiries in casual compliments about my career or our father's retirement savings. "An architect, wow," he'd say at family dinners, his voice slick with admiration. "You must be doing really well, Kelly. It's so inspiring." Then he'd turn to our dad. "And Robert, you must be enjoying the good life. A detective's pension goes a long way, I bet." I'd brush it off, telling myself I was being overly critical. Rachel was so happy, radiating a kind of bliss I hadn't seen in her before. She and Evan were a unit, hosting immaculate dinner parties and planning elaborate weekend getaways. As an event planner, Rachel was obsessed with curating the perfect experience, and her life with Evan seemed to be her masterpiece. She defended him with a ferocity that bordered on alarming. Once I made a light-hearted comment about Evan's expensive new watch, wondering how he could afford it. Rachel's smile tightened instantly. "He works hard, Kelly. He has a lot of high-profile clients. You should be happy for him, not suspicious." The conversation was shut down, a door slammed in my face. It became a pattern. Any question about Evan's finances or his vaguely defined business ventures was met with a wall of defensiveness from my sister. He was always on the cusp of a huge deal, a massive investment that was about to pay off. He just needed a little more capital to get it over the line. And somehow, Rachel always seemed to have the money to give him. She started asking me for small loans, then larger ones. "It's just for a few weeks, Kel," she'd say, her voice bright and breezy. "Evan's client is just a little slow on payment, and we have this bill due. You know how it is." I lent her the money, of course. She was my sister, but a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. I saw her selling her car, a reliable sedan for a flashier, leased sports model that Evan insisted they needed for his image. She started dressing differently, in clothes that were more expensive but less her. Her laughter, once so genuine, now seemed a little too loud, a little too forced, like a performance for an unseen audience. My father noticed it too. During one of our weekly calls, he asked, "Is everything all right with Rachel? She seems stretched." I confided in him, voicing my concerns about Evan and the money. My dad, ever the detective, listened patiently. "Trust your gut, Kelly," he said, his voice low and serious. "Your gut is your first line of defense. People who are financially sound don't constantly talk about being on the verge of a windfall, they just have the windfall. The facade began to crack during our parents' 35th wedding anniversary party. Rachel, the event planner, had insisted on organizing the entire thing at a lavish venue. Evan was her co-host, GL. Idling through the crowd with a champagne flute in hand, charming all our relatives. Later in the evening, I found him in a quiet corridor, locked in a tense phone conversation. "I don't care what you were told," he hissed into the phone, his charming mask gone, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. "The money was supposed to be there. You find it." He caught my eye, and in a split second, the snarl vanished, replaced by his signature dazzling smile. "Just a difficult client," he said, winking at me as if we were sharing a secret. "You know how it is in the world of high finance." He walked away, leaving me cold. The man on the phone was the real Evan. The charming host inside was the illusion, and I realized with a sickening lurch that my sister hadn't just fallen in love with a man, she'd bought into a lie. The perfect family facade was built on a foundation of sand, and I could feel the tide starting to come in. The cost of it all, I would soon find out, was going to be far higher than any of us could have ever imagined. The cracks in the facade widened into fissures over the next few months. Evan's big deal never seemed to materialize, but his demands for cash became more frequent and more brazen. Rachel's calls to me shifted from breezy requests to desperate, whispered pleas. The loans I had given her, which she'd sworn were temporary, were never paid back. When I gently brought it up, she would get defensive, her voice laced with an unfamiliar bitterness. "Do you think I want to be in this position, Kelly? Evan is trying to build a future for us. A little support from my family wouldn't hurt." It was a masterful piece of manipulation, turning my concern into an accusation of selfishness. I was no longer helping my sister, I was apparently failing her. The guilt was a heavy weight, but it was outweighed by a growing sense of alarm. I started distancing myself, not from Rachel, but from Evan. I made excuses to miss their dinner parties and declined invitations for weekend trips. The less I saw of his practiced charm, the clearer the truth became. The breaking point arrived on a cold Tuesday evening. I was working late, trying to finalize a complex blueprint for a community arts center. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Can you come over? Emergency. Please." My heart leaped into my throat. I pictured a fire, a medical crisis. I packed my laptop, called a cab, and was at her apartment in less than 20 minutes. When Rachel opened the door, there was no sign of a disaster. The apartment was pristine, scented with vanilla and ambition. Evan was sitting on their plush white sofa, staring intently at his laptop. He didn't look up when I entered. Rachel, however, looked frantic. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was twisting a corner of her silk blouse between her fingers. "Thanks for coming," she whispered, leading me to the kitchen. "I didn't want to text you about this." She explained that Evan had a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity, a guaranteed high-return deal on a new line of fitness tech. The problem, she said, was one of liquidity. The investment window was closing at midnight, and they were short by $20,000. She said it with a straight face, as if it were a perfectly normal amount of money to need on a Tuesday night. I just stared at her, speechless. $20,000. It was more than all the previous loans combined. "Rachel, I can't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't have that kind of money just lying around. It's my savings, my emergency fund." Her face fell. "But it's guaranteed, Kelly. We'd pay you back double in 6 months. Evan has it all in writing." "Let me see it," I said, my architect's mind kicking in. I wanted to see the contracts, the prospectus, the evidence. This was a structure, and I needed to see its foundation. From the living room, Evan finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's too complicated for you to understand, Kelly. It's high-level finance." He still hadn't looked at me. He was deliberately dismissing me, treating me like a child. That's when my spine stiffened. "Try me, Evan," I said, my voice firmer now. "I design buildings for a living. I think I can handle a simple contract." A tense silence filled the room. Rachel looked from me to Evan, her expression pleading. Evan slowly closed his laptop and turned to face me. The charming mask was gone. His eyes were flat and cold, like chips of granite. "There's no time for that," he said. "We need the money now." "Then the answer is no," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm not giving you $20,000 based on a verbal promise and a condescending remark. I'm sorry, Rachel." I turned to leave, but Evan moved with a speed that was terrifying. He was in front of me in an instant, blocking the doorway. He was much taller than me, his body, honed by years of weightlifting, radiating a palpable sense of menace. "I don't think you heard me," he said. His voice a low growl. "We need that money." My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at my sister, expecting her to intervene to tell him to back off. But she just stood there, frozen, her face a mask of fear and indecision. She wouldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood. She wasn't just a victim in this, she was a willing participant. She had lured me here knowing this might happen. "Evan, move," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think you can just walk away?" He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne was suffocating. "Your sister told me all about your little nest egg, the responsible one, always saving for a rainy day. Well, guess what? It's pouring." He reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was like steel. A jolt of pure, unadulterated fear shot through me. This wasn't a family squabble over money anymore. This was something else entirely. "Let go of me," I said, my voice shaking. "Give us the transfer code for your account, and I will," he said, his face inches from mine. His smile was a predator's grin. "No," I choked out. His grip tightened and he shoved me backward. I stumbled, my back hitting the hard edge of the kitchen counter with a painful thud. The wind was knocked out of me. I gasped for air, my eyes wide with shock and pain. And through it all, Rachel just watched. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just watched as her husband assaulted her sister. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had been torn off, revealing the monster underneath. And the ugliest part of it all was the reflection I saw in my own sister's eyes. Complicity. The sound of my body hitting the counter seemed to echo in the sudden, deafening silence. Pain radiated from my lower back, sharp and insistent. I stared at Evan, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. He hadn't just threatened me, he had put his hands on me. He had used physical force to intimidate me. And standing just a few feet away, my sister, Rachel, remained a statue, her face pale but her lips sealed. "Evan, what are you doing?" she finally whispered, her voice so faint it was barely audible. It wasn't a command or a rebuke, it was a question laced with fear, not for me, but of him. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, blazing with a terrifying intensity. "I'm getting what we're owed," he snarled. "She sits on all that cash while we're struggling. Is that fair? Is that what family does?" The audacity of his words was staggering. He was twisting reality, painting himself as the victim and me as the villain, all while my back was screaming in protest. I pushed myself upright, my hand instinctively going to the pained area. "You're not owed anything," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "The money I have is mine. I worked for it." I looked past him directly at Rachel, my eyes pleading with her to snap out of whatever spell he had cast. "Rachel, look at what he's doing. This isn't right. You know it isn't." For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the old Rachel, a glimmer of shame and conflict in her eyes. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. Evan shot her a look, a silent, powerful command, and her expression hardened. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin in a defensive gesture I knew all too well. "Kelly, you're overreacting," she said, her voice now clinical and cold. "He just stumbled. You're being dramatic." The words hit me harder than the shove had. "Dramatic?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "He pushed me, Rachel. He assaulted me because I wouldn't give you money. How can you stand there and lie about it?" "Nobody assaulted you," Evan cut in, stepping between us again, a smug smirk on his face. He was enjoying this, feeding off the power he held over both of us. "You lost your balance. Happens to the best of us. Now, are you going to help your family, or are you going to be selfish?" It was then that I truly understood the depth of my sister's deceit. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment on her part. This was a conscious choice. She had chosen him. She had chosen the lie, the illusion of a glamorous life he promised, over me, her sister, her own blood. She was willing to stand by and watch me be physically intimidated and then gaslight me about it, all to protect him and their fragile, debt-ridden fantasy. My fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. There was nothing left to salvage here. The relationship I had cherished my entire life had just been declared dead, and my sister was the one holding the shovel. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I moved toward the door, deliberately avoiding Evan's path. I expected him to block me again, but this time, he let me pass. My refusal, my transformation from a pleading victim to someone cold and resolute, seemed to have momentarily thrown him off his game. My hand was on the doorknob when Rachel spoke again, her voice sharp with desperation and anger. "If you walk out that door, Kelly, don't ever expect to ask me for anything again. Family is supposed to be there for each other, through thick and thin. Some of us actually understand that." I paused, my back to her, and let her final, hypocritical words hang in the air. I didn't turn around. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the tears that were now welling in my eyes. I simply opened the door and walked out into the sterile hallway of her expensive apartment building, leaving my sister and her monster behind. The cab ride home was a blur. My body was shaking, not from the cold, but from the shock and the profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just the shove, it was the lie. It was Rachel's willingness to deny my reality to protect his. She had looked me right in the eye and told me that what I had experienced didn't happen. She had invalidated my pain, my fear, my very perception of the truth. That was a deeper wound than any bruise. When I finally got back to my own apartment, the one place I felt safe, I locked the door, slid down against it, and let the sobs come. They were ragged, painful bursts of grief for the sister I had lost. The Rachel I knew, the one who would have defended me against anyone, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman so beholden to a lie that she would sacrifice her own family to maintain it. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, the pain in my back a dull throb, a physical reminder of the emotional wreckage. The initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. This wasn't just a family dispute. Evan was dangerous, and Rachel was his willing accomplice. They had conspired to extort money from me, and when that failed, they had resorted to physical intimidation and psychological manipulation. They had to be stopped. But how? My mind, trained to see structures and find solutions, began to churn. I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed someone who understood evidence, who knew how to deal with liars and manipulators, who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. I needed my father. It was almost 1 a.m. when I finally picked up the phone to call my dad. My hands were still shaking, and my voice was hoarse from crying. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over his contact photo. Part of me was ashamed, feeling as if I had failed by letting the situation escalate so dangerously. Another part felt like I was betraying my sister by reporting on her, even after what she had done. But the logical, architect part of my brain knew that a compromised structure must be reported before it collapses and hurts more people. Evan and Rachel were a compromised structure. "Kelly, is everything okay?" My dad, Robert, answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. It was the old detective's instinct. A call after midnight was never good news. The sound of his calm, steady voice broke through my composure. "Dad," I started, and then the words just tumbled out, a messy, incoherent torrent of emotion. I told him everything. The constant requests for money, my growing suspicions about Evan, the staged emergency at their apartment, the demand for $20,000. And then, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I told him about the shove. I told him about the look on Evan's face, the menace in his eyes. And worst of all, I told him how Rachel had just stood there and then lied to my face, accusing me of being dramatic. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a vacant silence. It was heavy, filled with a controlled rage that I knew all too well. It was the same quiet intensity he used to have when he was on a tough case. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously low. "Where does your back hurt, sweetheart?" "My lower back on the right side. It hit the corner of the counter," I managed to say. "Go to the emergency room. Right now," he commanded, not with panic but with clinical precision. "Tell them exactly what happened, that you were assaulted by your brother-in-law. Don't mention Rachel's part yet, just the assault. Tell them he shoved you and you fell against a counter. They need to document your injuries. Every bruise, every scrape. It's evidence, Kelly. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm on my way. I'll meet you there. Send me the address of the hospital you're going to. And Kelly," he said, his voice softening for just a moment, "you did the right thing by calling me. You did nothing wrong." His words were a lifeline. They validated my experience and cut through the gaslighting and self-doubt that Rachel had tried to plant in my mind. Following his instructions, I went to the nearest hospital. The process was humiliating and surreal. Sitting in the sterile ER, I recounted the story to a nurse and then a doctor, feeling a fresh wave of shame each time. But I did exactly as my dad had said, focusing on physical act. The doctor was kind, examining my back and noting the rapidly forming, angry purple bruise. He took photos for the official medical report. It was, as my dad had predicted, evidence. My dad arrived just as I was being discharged, his face set like stone. He didn't hug me right away. Instead, his detective's eyes scanned me from head to toe, assessing the damage. He looked at the discharge papers, his jaw tightening as he read the diagnosis: deep tissue contusion. Then, he finally wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time that night, I felt completely safe. "We're going to your apartment," he said as we walked to his car. "And you're going to tell me every single detail you can remember. Every loan, every date, every suspicious conversation. We're building a case." For the next 3 hours, my apartment became an incident room. My dad sat at my dining table with a legal pad and a pen, and I talked. Fueled by coffee and a righteous anger that was finally eclipsing my grief, I gave him a full timeline. I went through my bank records, printing out the statements that showed the transfers to Rachel. I recounted conversations, remembering specific phrases Evan had used about his high-profile clients and guaranteed returns. My dad listened, his pen scratching across the page, his expression grim. He wasn't just a father listening to his daughter, he was a detective piecing together a puzzle. He saw the pattern I had only vaguely sensed: a classic case of financial exploitation, escalating to physical intimidation when the well started to run dry. "He's a predator," my dad said, finally setting his pen down. "A common con artist who found the perfect mark in your sister. She's so desperate to project this image of success that she's become his accomplice. The assault wasn't just about the money, Kelly. It was about control. He needed to prove he could dominate you, and she let him, to maintain her fantasy." He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "We can go to the police right now. With the medical report and your testimony, they'll charge him with assault. It's a clear-cut case." I hesitated. "What about Rachel?" I asked, the question tasting like ash. "She'll be questioned. She'll likely lie for him. It will get ugly. It will tear what's left of this family apart," he said, his voice heavy with the truth. "But they need to be stopped. What he did to you, he'll do to someone else, and she'll let him." I thought about it, about the public humiliation, the family drama, the inevitable destruction. But then I thought about Evan's smug face and my sister's cold, dismissive eyes. They couldn't be allowed to get away with it. They couldn't be allowed to just move on to their next victim. "There's another way," my dad said, leaning forward. A new light flickered in his eyes, the spark of an idea. "A police report is one thing, public humiliation is another. These people, especially your sister, are obsessed with their image. What if we don't just tell people what they did? What if we show them?" He paused, letting the idea sink in. "Evan is arrogant. Rachel is weak. That's a combination that can be exploited. They think they've won. They think you're just going to crawl away and cry. We can use that. We can set a trap so perfect, so undeniable that they will expose themselves. No lawyers, no he said, she said. Just their own words, their own actions, for everyone to see. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. I promise you, Kelly, he said, his voice a low, steady vow. They will not get away with this. We will make them accountable for what they've done. I promise. In that moment, he wasn't just my father. He was my partner. And the pain I felt was slowly being forged into purpose. The grief I felt for my sister slowly began to calcify into a cold, hard resolve. My dad's promise wasn't just about vengeance, it was about justice. It was about restoring the truth that Rachel and Evan had tried so violently to shatter. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a clandestine project. By day, I was Kelly, the focused architect, meticulously designing structures of steel and glass. By night, my dining table became our war room, where my dad and I designed a different kind of structure, an inescapable trap. My father's 35 years on the force had taught him how criminals think. Arrogance is a weakness, not a strength, he explained one evening, tapping his pen on a fresh page of his legal pad. Evan thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He believes he can talk his way out of anything. And Rachel, she's terrified of her perfect world collapsing. Her weakness is her obsession with appearances. We'll use both. The plan we devised was something I, as an architect, could appreciate for its structural integrity. It had a foundation, a framework, and a carefully designed entry and exit. Except for them, there would be no exit. We called it final investment. The first step was bait. I needed to re-establish contact, but not as a victim. I had to appear broken, defeated, and ready to capitulate. It was the hardest role I'd ever have to play. With my dad coaching me, I drafted a text to Rachel. It was a masterpiece of feigned remorse. Rachel, I'm so sorry for how I acted. I was stressed and I overreacted. I've been thinking and I was being selfish. You were right. Family should help family. I've been thinking about the investment. Can we talk? It felt disgusting to type, every word a betrayal of my own reality. But my dad was firm. They need to believe they have all the power, he said. Right now, they think you're scared of them. We need them to think you're scared for them. As predicted, Rachel responded within minutes. Her tone was magnanimous, the gracious queen forgiving her errant subject. Of course, Kelly, I'm glad you came to your senses. Evan was worried about you. Let's put it all behind us. The condescension was practically dripping from the screen. The hook was set. Now we needed to build the stage. My dad, using some of his old contacts, procured a set of high-definition, audio-enabled hidden cameras. They were minuscule, no bigger than the head of a screw. He showed me how to embed them into everyday objects: a smoke detector, a digital photo frame, a phone charger plugged into a wall. My apartment was to be our theater. Next came the most crucial part of the blueprint: the investor. My dad reached out to a trusted former colleague, a man named Mike who had retired from the force and now did private security consulting. Mike was a brilliant character actor, with a stern, no-nonsense demeanor that could intimidate a rock. He would play the role of Mr. Peterson, a wealthy, discreet financial backer I had supposedly secured to help fund Evan's deal. The narrative we constructed was simple, and for someone like Evan, irresistible. I would tell them that after our fight, I felt so guilty that I had approached a wealthy client of my architectural firm, Mr. Peterson, with Evan's proposal. Peterson, I'd claim, was intrigued but cautious. He was willing to put up the entire sum, but only after meeting Evan in person to vet him and finalize the details. The meeting had to be at my apartment as a neutral ground. The final element of the blueprint was the money itself. It had to look real. My dad withdrew $5,000 from his own savings. We bundled it with stacks of convincing prop money, secured with a legitimate bank wrapper, to create a briefcase containing what looked like $200,000, an amount so large it would make Evan's greed overwhelm any lingering caution. A week after my initial text, I called Rachel. I played my part, my voice soft and apologetic. I told her the story about Mr. Peterson, emphasizing his wealth and his insistence on a face-to-face meeting. He's a bit old school, Rachel. He wants to look Evan in the eye before he transfers the funds. He wants to hear the pitch directly from him. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. This was it, the big score she had been dreaming of, delivered to her by the very sister she had betrayed. The irony was completely lost on her. "Of course," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Evan is amazing at this stuff. He'll have this Peterson guy eating out of his hand. When does he want to meet?" We set the time, Friday evening, 7 p.m. The day of the meeting, my apartment felt different. The air was charged with anticipation. My dad and I did a final sweep, testing the cameras one last time. The video feeds were crystal clear, streaming to a tablet my dad would be monitoring from a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Mike, or Mr. Peterson, arrived looking impeccable in a tailored suit, his face a mask of stern authority. He carried the briefcase. "Remember," my dad said to me in a low voice before he left, "let him do the talking. You're just the architect who brought them together. You're a facilitator, nothing more. Let Evan hang himself with his own words." My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't a blueprint of steel and glass anymore. It was a structure of lies and deception, designed to collapse on the 2 people who had torn my world apart. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep, steadying breath. Showtime. I opened the door to see Rachel and Evan, their faces beaming with triumphant smiles. They had no idea they were walking into the most meticulously designed trap of their lives. Evan and Rachel entered my apartment as if they were conquering heroes returning from a successful campaign. Evan was dressed in a suit that was clearly too expensive for him, radiating an aura of smug confidence. Rachel was at his side, her eyes sweeping over my living room with a look of proprietary glee, as if she were already mentally spending the money. "Kelly, so good of you to arrange this," Evan said, clapping me on the shoulder in a gesture of false camaraderie that made my skin crawl. He saw Mike, Mr. Peterson, sitting in an armchair, the briefcase on the floor beside him. Evan's eyes locked onto the case, his pupils dilating almost imperceptibly. The bait was working. I made the introductions, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Evan, Rachel, this is Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, this is my brother-in-law, Evan, and my sister, Rachel." Mike stood up, his demeanor cool and imposing. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, assessing Evan with a critical gaze that immediately put Evan on the back foot. "Evan," Mike said, his voice a low baritone. "Kelly speaks highly of your business acumen. I confess, I'm skeptical. I've seen a lot of young men with big ideas and empty pockets." The subtle challenge worked perfectly. Evan's ego, pricked by the insinuation, puffed up in response. "Mr. Peterson, I can assure you I'm the real deal," he said, his charm offensive going into overdrive. "What I'm offering is a ground-floor opportunity in a revolutionary fitness technology. The returns aren't just good, they're guaranteed." They all sat down. I took a seat slightly away from the group, just as my dad had instructed, adopting the posture of a peripheral observer. The hidden cameras in the smoke detector and the photo frame had a perfect view of the entire scene. "Guaranteed is a strong word, son," Mike said, leaning forward. "In my experience, the only things guaranteed are death and taxes. Talk me through the specifics. Where does my money go?" What followed was the most masterful and most damning performance I had ever witnessed. Evan, fueled by pure avarice, launched into a detailed, elaborate fantasy. He spun a web of lies about shell corporations, offshore accounts, and exclusive patents that didn't exist. He dropped names of tech billionaires he'd supposedly met and spoke of market projections that were pure fiction. It was a beautiful, intricate tapestry of deceit, and he was weaving it live on camera. Rachel, playing the role of the supportive partner, chimed in at all the right moments. "Evan is just being modest," she'd say with a tinkling laugh. "He's been working on this for years. It's his passion." Mike let him talk for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally interjecting with a sharp, probing question that would force Evan to dig himself deeper into his own lies. Finally, Mike held up a hand to silence him. "It's a compelling story," Mike said, his expression unreadable. "But I have one final concern. Kelly mentioned you had a disagreement. She said you needed the funds urgently. My investments require stability. I can't have my partners getting into physical altercations over money." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Evan's confident smile faltered. Rachel's face went pale. "That was just a misunderstanding," Rachel said quickly, jumping to his defense. "A small family argument. Kelly was being a little emotional." Mike turned his steely gaze on me. "Kelly, is that how you remember it?" My heart was in my throat. This was my cue. I looked at my sister, at the desperate plea in her eyes, and felt nothing but cold resolve. "No," I said, my voice clear and strong. "That's not how I remember it. I remember Evan demanding $20,000, and when I refused, he grabbed me and shoved me into my kitchen counter." Evan scoffed, trying to regain control. "That is a complete fabrication. She's making it up. She tripped. I tried to catch her." "A lie," I stated calmly. "Mr. Peterson, my wife, was there. She saw the whole thing," Evan said, turning to Rachel for support, absolutely confident she would back his play. "Tell him, honey. Tell him what really happened." This was the moment the entire plan had been built for. Every camera was focused on my sister. Her husband, the man she had sacrificed her family for, was looking at her. The investor, holding the key to their fantasy future, was looking at her. And I, the sister she had betrayed, was looking at her. Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Evan and Mike. The pressure was immense. She could tell the truth and lose everything, or she could double down on the lie that had brought her this far. She made her choice. "Kelly is confused," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly but her words clear. "She was upset and she stumbled. Evan would never, ever hurt her. He's the kindest man I know. She's just being vindictive because we asked her for help and she was too selfish to give it." And there it was. Her final, ultimate betrayal, delivered with chilling conviction, all recorded in high-definition audio and video. She didn't just lie, she assassinated my character to protect him. Mike stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then he slowly shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "What a shame," he said softly. He reached down, clicked open the briefcase, and turned it around for TH. M to C, they both gasped. The stacks of money, crisp and neatly bundled, looked like a dream come true. "This," Mike said, gesturing to the cash, "was yours. $200,000. But my one condition was honesty. I don't do business with liars, and I certainly don't do business with men who assault women and the women who cover for them." He then pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and placed it on the coffee table. My voice filled the room, playing from the recording my dad had been making. "No, that's not how I remember it." He grabbed me and shoved me. It was followed immediately by Rachel's recorded voice, sharp and clear. "Kelly is confused. She stumbled. Evan would never, ever hurt her." The color drained from Evan's and Rachel's faces. They stared at the phone, then at the hidden camera I pointed out on the photo frame, then at Mike, their expressions a grotesque mixture of horror, confusion, and dawning comprehension. They hadn't been in a business meeting. They had been in an interrogation, and they had just delivered a full confession. Mike stood up. "The performance is over," he said, his voice like ice. He snapped the briefcase shut, picked it up, and walked to the door. "Good luck with your future endeavors." He walked out, leaving a stunned, devastating silence in his wake. Evan and Rachel were left sitting in the ruins of their own lies, the truth finally and irrevocably exposed. The silence that followed Mike's departure was heavier and more suffocating than any argument. Evan and Rachel just sat there, frozen, their triumphant expressions from an hour earlier now replaced with slack-jawed disbelief. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on them, and the sound of it was the quiet implosion of their entire world. Evan was the first to break. He shot to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. It wasn't directed at me, it was directed at Rachel. You, he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at her. This is your fault, your stupid, emotional sister. You were supposed to have her under control. Rachel flinched as if he had struck her. Me, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. You're the one who put your hands on her. You're the one who couldn't keep your story straight. You lied to me. I lied to you. I was building a life for us, he roared back. Watching them tear each other apart was surreal. The perfect, unified couple, the team that had presented such a flawless facade to the world, was disintegrating before my very eyes. All it took was the removal of a single element, the prospect of money, for their foundation to crumble into dust. Their loyalty to each other was purely transactional, and the transaction had just been declined. I didn't say a word. I just stood by the window, watching them, feeling a strange and unsettling calm. My dad had been right. We didn't need to defeat them. We just needed to give them enough rope, and they would hang themselves and each other. Just then, the apartment door opened, and my dad walked in. He didn't look at them. He walked over to me, put a comforting hand on my shoulder, and then addressed the scene. That's enough, he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Evan and Rachel both fell silent, turning to him as if they'd just noticed a ghost. My dad held up his tablet, the screen showing the video recording of the evening. I have everything, he said simply. Evan, I have your fraudulent investment pitch and your admission of assault, which you called catching her. Rachel, I have you lying to cover up a crime and slandering your sister. This video is being backed up to a secure cloud server as we speak. He let that sink in. So here's what happens now, he continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You two are going to leave this apartment. You are going to go home and pack your things, and you are going to disappear from Kelly's life. You will have no further contact with her. No calls, no texts, no emails. You will not speak her name. You will not come within 500 feet of her home or her place of work. You can't do that, Evan blustered, trying to summon some of his old bravado, but it came out weak and thin. Oh, I can, my dad said, taking a step forward. Because if you don't, this video goes to two places. First, the district attorney's office. You'll be facing charges of assault, attempted extortion, and conspiracy. Second, it goes public. I'll make sure every single one of your high-profile clients, Evan, sees exactly what kind of man you are. And Rachel, he said, turning to my sister, whose face was now streaked with tears, I'll make sure every event planner and client in the city sees how you treat your own family. Your reputations, the only things you two seem to truly care about, will be utterly and irrevocably destroyed. It was a checkmate. There was no move left for them to make. Defeated the Why shuffled out of my apartment without another word, not even looking at each other. I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hall, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The weeks that followed were quiet. As my dad predicted, Evan and Rachel vanished. I later heard through a cousin that their relationship had imploded spectacularly within days of that night. Evan, facing a mountain of debt with no benefactor to save him, left town. Rachel, humiliated and broke, had to give up her expensive apartment and move back in with our mother, who was still struggling to understand the whole story. My relationship with Rachel is fractured, perhaps irreparably. She has sent me a few rambling, self-pitying texts, messages that are more about her own pain than any real remorse for what she did to me. I haven't responded. Forgiveness is a structure that requires a solid foundation of trust and remorse, and she has provided neither. My dad and I are closer than ever. We rebuilt my sense of security, not with steel and concrete, but with truth and justice. The trap we set wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back the narrative that they had tried to steal from me. They tried to make me a victim, a liar, an emotional, dramatic, selfish woman. But in the end, their own greed and deceit, captured on camera for all to see, revealed the truth. I am an architect. I build things that last. And I had finally demolished the toxic structure that was poisoning my life, leaving me with a clear, open space to build something new and much, much stronger.